The Center for the Improvement of Human Functioning International presents this luncheon lecture. Today's topic, sensitivity to foods. What's eating you? Your presenter, Rebecca Kirby, MD, MSRD.
Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Rebecca Kirby. I'm one of the doctors out here at the center. And in case you don't know me, the alphabet soup behind my name means I'm a board-certified family physician. I have a master's degree in biochemistry, and I'm a registered dietitian. And today we're going to talk about food. So, what's eating you? We're going to talk about food sensitivities, and there are a lot of reactions to foods. And reactions to foods trigger our immune response, and that immune response can be several mechanisms. It can be defensive, it can be neutralizing, where the offending agent is just put out of action, or it can be destructive. And destructive is when something breaks down or is lysed or torn apart in your body. That's a destructive reaction. But the response depends on not only the food, we're all very different in how we respond to foods and which foods, but it also depends on how much exposure to that food that you have. And don't forget about us, it depends on the host, us, how healthy we are, how we respond to that food. And the thing about food is we have to eat, so we can't give it up. And those sensitivities are difficult to figure out because we eat a mixture of foods, and foods have a mixture of things in them. Besides the biochemical aspects of the natural food, we have added a lot of biochemistry and chemicals to foods in the form of additives. So it's hard sometimes to figure out if it's the food or is it the food additive. And when we have those reactions, it can involve most systems of the body, but most notably the respiratory system, the nervous system, the musculoskeletal system, and it all boils down to the immune system. So, what do you think might be a symptom of a food sensitivity? Well, acne, yes. The whole list here, arthritis, bladder problems, bronchitis, that's inflammation in the bronchial tubes of the lung, bursitis, that's inflammation in the joints, canker sores in the mouth, congestion or sinus problems, low back pain, depression, edema, which is swelling, failure to thrive in infants, fatigue, bowel gas, rashes like eczema, hair loss, what we call alopecia, headache, hives, which is the itchy rash, hemorrhoids, hyperactivity, hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, irritable bowel, itching in lots of places, not just skin, learning problems, malabsorption, you don't get benefit of your foods and nutrients, poor memory and confusion, recurrent infections, sinusitis, ulcerative colitis, and weight gain. So, don't underestimate reactions to food. They're all different for everybody, and they could be many different things. Now, this is what's happening when you're having a reaction to food. Your food is acting as an antigen, and that word means a substance that makes your body produce an antibody. So the antibody is produced by your body to try to do something about the antigen. And I want you to understand that the term for antibody is also immunoglobulin. And you'll see that term like on your reports from the doctor, and they'll use this abbreviation big I, little g. That's an immunoglobulin. And it's usually followed by another capital letter that tells you which immunoglobulin it is. It might be the big E, E for Edward, or E as in Edward. It might be the A, big A. That means it came from the bowel. So these are interchangeable. It's just that in scientific nomenclature they use IgE, IgA, IgG. Okay, and this kind of gets to the heart of the talk today. Food may be the greatest antigen challenge to our immune system. So, all is not lost. It's important if you have a healthy bowel, this is your number one defense. Your gut wall acts as a barrier to foods that may have allergen triggers. It's a barrier to toxins. And if your barrier is not healthy, it's a term we call dysbiosis. It means poor bowel microflora. We have over 400 different kind of bacteria in our bowels. And it's easy to get an overgrowth of the less desirable bacteria. We call it putrefactive, which pretty much, makes a picture of what's going on. And yeast can overgrow. It's natural there, but it can overgrow. And all these things can cause a disorder of your bowel. And what happens? You have more absorption. It's what we call increased bowel permeability. Sometimes you hear that term leaky gut is sort of a shortcut name for it. But what happens is then you're digesting bigger proteins that are poorly digested. You're getting these foreign antigens that your body is reacting to with the antibodies, and you're letting toxic substance in. And these days, like I said, there's all sorts of extra things that the body hasn't seen as far as foreign chemicals, foreign to the body. They're synthetic chemicals. Now, in medical nomenclature, there's several types of hypersensitivities, and they boil them down to 4, and they call them type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. Now, I just want to familiarize you real quick. We're going to talk about type 1 because it's the IgE, and the big E. And those are the ones that are the acute allergies that people get right away after eating an offending food. And most people will know if they have these allergies because it's an immediate reaction, anything from a quick hive, skin rash, to swelling of your throat and what they call fatal anaphylaxis when you go into shock. And then there's the type 2 and type 3, which are mediated by the Ig, immunoglobulin, that's with the big G, and that's a delayed reaction, delayed hypersensitivities. And then type 4 down here is something that's mediated by lymphokines and all those things. That's that reactive contact dermatitis, like when you get poison ivy. This is what's going on. This is the type 4 hypersensitivity. Okay, well, since we've been eating all through history, there have been observations of hypersensitivities. We're not the first ones to figure out that people can be sensitive to food. Hippocrates was back saying that he observed that milk caused not only gastric upset, but in some people it caused hives, that itchy swelling rash. And then in 1679, a doctor named Willis observed that wine could precipitate asthma. And then in the Kansas Medical Journal, in 1936, there was a doctor who described sensitivities that differed from the immediate anaphylactic reaction that occurs days after the ingesting of offending foods. So he was describing what we're going to talk a lot about today, is that delayed hypersensitivity, something other than that quick anaphylactic reaction that people often get to, like peanuts and shellfish. Now, another interesting observation was what nightshade foods can do to some folks. It's a trigger for muscle and joint stiffness in many people, and it was first observed in livestock. They were feeding, this particular group were feeding their animals the leaves from nightshade plants, and observed pretty soon they were all grazing from their knees because they had so much fibrosis and stiffness in their neck they couldn't get it down there from standing. And just to review, the nightshade is a botanical family that includes the tomato, the white potato, white meat, it doesn't matter whether it has a red skin or not, the eggplant, peppers, not black pepper, but green peppers, hot peppers, and tobacco. All right, now food hypersensitivity. We're going to talk about both allergic, which is we've been talking about so far, and also non-allergic reactions. And if you just want to kind of get down to definitions, an allergy is an acquired hypersensitivity to something you wouldn't necessarily expect a reaction to, and the hypersensitivity is a reaction that is destructive. Okay, and that IgE E, that's the type 1 hypersensitivity. That's the classic food allergy. That's where you get the skin test, or what we call the RAST or the ELISA test. It's pretty much what we consider a fixed food allergy, and it causes the hives, the airway swelling, vomiting, and sometimes people get their airway so swelled up they can't breathe. And what's happening is these mast cells release all these things, basophils, histamines, and that causes all the swelling. Now, it's much more common in children to have these type of allergies. 5 to 8% will be positive when they do those skin tests, and only 1 to 2% of adults. And even though they say it's permanent, they actually, some of them you can outgrow. They say that the tree nut allergies, and peanuts they lump in that even though it isn't a tree nut, people don't necessarily outgrow, but they can outgrow egg allergies to some extent. Not everybody. But again, this is the type 1 immediate. It's an acute allergy. Usually there's only one food that's, if you have an acute allergy or two, it's not something you would be acutely allergic to, like 20 foods. And the symptoms appear immediately. That's the difference. In a couple of hours, you're going to know you're having an acute allergy. And it sometimes takes a tiny amount. You hear the stories about a child who's very allergic to peanuts. They kiss grandma who had just eaten a peanut butter sandwich, and they go into shock. Well, trace amounts can really sensitize many people. And as we've discussed, it can affect the skin, the airway, also can affect the gut with vomiting and diarrhea. And like I said, it's more common in children and a little bit less so in adults. And in adults, what you see sometimes, instead of like the swelling of the airway, you may see the rashes, an exacerbation of the eczema or nasal runniness. Now, there are specific foods that are on the hit list for the type 1 IgE hypersensitivity, and they're so major that the FDA has required strict labeling. So these, if your foods, packaged foods, have any of these things in them, they have to be on the label. And I was reading a peanut butter label the other day, and I noticed at the bottom of the label they said contains peanuts. And I thought, okay, they're just covering themselves in case somebody thought peanut butter maybe didn't have peanuts in it. But these are the big offenders. It's your shellfish, like lobster, crab, shrimp, the legume family, mainly the peanuts and the soybeans bother a lot of people. And then the mollusks, the clams, the scallops, the oysters, and then what we call tree nuts, the almonds, Brazil nuts are a big offender, hazelnuts, and are some of the most offending tree nuts, but all of them will lump in there somewhere, like walnuts and pecans. Milk, eggs, fish, and then wheat. Okay, so those are the big IgE, acute allergy foods. Now we're going to talk about the IgG hypersensitivity reaction to foods. This is the delayed. This is where you don't know from 2 hours to 2 days what your reaction, which food you ate that's giving you a reaction. And sometimes it's your favorite foods that you eat a lot of. But there's hope. You know, unlike the other ones where if you're allergic to peanuts, you have to be avoiding it. These you may be able to desensitize yourself some with. And you won't have those skin tests be effective on this kind of hypersensitivity. And we often find that not only are these things that people enjoy a lot, but sometimes they experience discomfort giving them up. A little bit of a withdrawal there. But anyway, they're hard to diagnose because there's so many symptoms. You know, that list of the whole kit and caboodle in the beginning, that really says a lot of what you can expect to experience. Everybody's a little different which system it might affect. but likely to be a reaction, delayed reaction, what we call delayed hypersensitivity, the IgG. So when I look at people's hypersensitivity food list, I never see 1 or 2 or 3 things. I see 10, 20, or more. So multiple foods will be involved. And usually you don't have to just smell the food to break out. You have to actually eat it, and sometimes fair amounts to get a reaction. And again, the symptoms are going to be delayed. You might not even know for 3 days. And much more diverse on what it affects, like the long list I was telling you about. And it's common in both children and adults. And guess what? You know, most of our food reactions are these delayed hypersensitivities, 60 to 80% of food reactions. Now, there are other reactions to foods, and I just want to go over those a bit so we can understand, you know, the immune response, and there's also other things. Don't forget about the response to foods when you get food poisoning. I mean, that's something entirely different because some bacteria has gotten in your system and produced what we call an endotoxin. Some of them do exotoxins, but anyway, that can make you sick. And then I put down contaminants like mycotoxins. Those are ones from different kinds of molds. And that also, however, can be a hypersensitivity to molds because some people are very sensitive to eating molds. Now, there's something in the medical literature called oral allergy syndrome. It's localized to the mouth and the throat, and it's triggered most by apples, peaches, celery, tomatoes, and cherries. So sort of that itchy feeling in the mouth. And then there's the reaction to foods that includes not being able to digest the food. Now that's different because you're not producing enough of an enzyme to get your food digested. Milk is something that very commonly people become intolerant of for a couple of reasons. Now some people just flat cannot digest the milk protein, and they don't break it down properly. And this can also occur in children. It's documented that the protein that is not broken down properly is something called casomorphin, and it has morphine on the end because it gives you that sort of reaction, and this is a problem with children who can't tolerate dairy products. They sometimes get a little wafty on the digestive products there. And then something that's very common is lactose intolerance. It's not so much that you're not having a hypersensitivity reaction to food, you're just not digesting it. And that's the lactose sugar in milk. Often as we get older, and certain ethnic groups in particular just can't break down the lactose sugar. And lactose is a natural sugar that's in milk. In fact, milk is the only animal protein that has a carbohydrate in it, and it has sugar, lactose. So if you're not breaking it down, you get gas, bloating, and very often diarrhea. And it gets real common. European ancestry, maybe 2 to 24%, but Native Americans, African Americans, and Asians, anywhere from 60 to 90% just can't digest milk. And there's, you know, enzymes that you can take to help you break down milk proteins, and there's enzymes to break down the lactose sugar, and very often they actually add it to milks. You'll see milk products where they've already done the breakdown. And you'll also notice if you tried those, they're sweeter because the lactose is broken down and it gives you the sweeter components. Also, to some extent, yogurts have had a little bit of digestion of the milk sugar by the bacteria, the beneficial bacteria that are in there, and sometimes you can tolerate a little bit of that. But if you add too many miscellaneous sugars with your yogurt, then you overtax the enzymes trying to digest all those sugars, and you may get more lactose intolerant. So you have to kind of be knowledgeable when you're eating dairy products. Now, something else that's different from a food sensitivity is actually the autoimmune disease to wheat protein. It's called celiac disease. Sometimes it's called celiac sprue. And it's a digestive disorder where some people are making antibodies specifically to the gliadin component of wheat gluten. And then there's a similar protein that's also in rye and barley. So they can't eat any of those products. And if you're interested in this, I did a whole lecture on celiac disease called Going Wheatless that's in both our library and upstairs in our gift of health. Because what happens is folks who don't know they have this and they keep eating wheat, they may or may not have symptoms. They start to get damage to their small intestine, and it flattens out their absorptive surface. And it's much more common than ordinarily thought. Europeans have known it was common over there for a long time, and we're beginning to figure it out too. It's more than 1 in 3,000 people with celiac, that like we used to think. It's probably more like 1 in 100 folks have celiac disease. And if you have a family history, meaning somebody close in your family has had or has celiac disease, your chances are really good, like 1 in 22 or so. So inquire in the family. All right, now, other reactions. This is what we call cross-reactivity. Say you're allergic to aspirin. Well, where did aspirin come from? Well, it was discovered in the willow bark, so it's a natural substance. And, you know, most of us aren't chewing on willow bark, but there's salicylates or aspirin-like compounds in foods, too. It's a protective mechanism for foods. So you may find oral symptoms like getting sore tongue from the salicylates in foods, especially if you have an allergy or a sensitivity to take an aspirin. Okay, and these are some of the big offenders. Curry powder, thyme needs to be dried for some reason because the fresh isn't quite as concentrated. Green apples, may have had that kind of pucker thing with the green apples. Potato skins, almonds are offender, tea, and certain vegetables. Okay, cross-reactivity with latex allergies. Latex allergies, a lot of us have discovered from latex gloves. And I myself had no clue that latex was a problem with me until I was doing my obstetrics rotation in a county hospital where about every 10 to 15 minutes you were changing gloves. And pretty soon my hands sort of looked like mincemeat. And lo and behold, since then they have come out with latex-free gloves because a lot of personnel in hospital have to use gloves, latex, or some kind of glove a lot. Well, fortunately, they've come around and figured out the glove situation. However, you might have a reaction to natural latex in foods if you have a latex allergy. And some of the things to look out for would be bananas, avocados, kiwi, chestnuts, papain, which is the enzyme, proteolytic enzyme in papayas. Hazelnut, melons, tomatoes, potatoes. Those are your nightshades. Carrots, celery, well, there's the papaya. Coconut, cherries, and there's more. So natural components in foods. All right, another natural component in food are histamines. Now remember when we were talking about the allergic reaction, the histamines are released by these cells called the mast cells, and they go out and they make you itchy and sometimes make your stomach start doing weird crampy things. Well, headaches, and some people have their blood pressure drop out or your heart starts beating fast. In fact, a lot of people kind of do their own sensitivity test to foods by just checking their heart rate. That would be a more immediate reaction because it would have to happen after you'd eaten the food. Okay, now naturally occurring histamines are in some of these kind of fermented foods, those really savory, flavorful cheeses like the Blue, the Roquefort, and the Parmesan, and then the really bold wines like the Chianti and the Burgundy. But we have some histamines in yeast extract, spinach, and aubergine, which for you guys who know French, you know what that's the word for? It's eggplant. And they use that as a color. You'll see, you know, looking at it like fabric swatches, it'll say aubergine, it'll be purple. Well, it's just me, it's eggplant. It just sounds, I guess, fancier. Okay, and then there's vasoactive substances in fermented foods that can give you those histamine triggers, you know, the cramping or the flushing, the headache, the palpitations. And that's fermented like bean sauces, cheddar cheese, again, the fermented types of cheeses, and pickled herring got picked out of that crowd too. Okay, now, one of the things that we do here is look at people's food sensitivities. And there's different ways to look at it. It's these delayed sensitivities we're going after, the ones that are not the acute allergies, the ones that are going to happen, you know, maybe in the afternoon or the morning you ate it, or 2 days later. And they can be IgG, antibody G related, or what we call cell mediated. And there's several ways. You see ELISA testing to IgG more and more offered by different labs and different doctors' offices. And these are taking advantage of the type 2 and type 3 cellular response. And so is the cell-mediated test like we do here. It's looking at the type 2 and type 3 delayed hypersensitivity. And what happens is with this reaction, you have all these cells being released. You have sensitized lymphocytes, those are white blood cells. Eosinophils are a kind of white blood cell. Platelets release histamine. This is platelet activating factor. You have cytokines and interferon. So you have a lot of cellular degradation and activity of all these components that set you up for food sensitivity. So what we do here is something called the Cytotoxic food sensitivity test. And there's a couple of lists of foods that you can be tested against. The first list is 90 foods and food additives, kind of the most common things. And then there's another list of 90 that gets you into less common foods and sort of fine-tuning with herbs and different types of vegetables and fruits and all, and grains. This test was actually first developed in 1956 and was modified over the years by a couple of folks named Bryant and Bryant. We have somebody in our lab who was trained by the Bryant and Bryant team who's been doing these food sensitivity tests for over 30 years. So we have a lot of expertise and experience on that account. And what you might do while we're waiting for the computer to wake up is take a look at the handouts I gave you. You might want to take a look at this list. It's called it's got the Biocenter lab at the top and then the food sensitivity test. Anyway, those are the actual foods that we are testing against, foods and food additives. The first list, like I was telling you, there's like 90 plus things on there. They're the most common things that people are sensitive to. Well, and actually the most common we eat, the additives and foods and all that. And then there's a supplemental list that gets some fine-tuning. And at the bottom is a basic list that just picks up 24 fairly common ones. And if you are doing the Health Hunter Beat the Odds Fair and you get the inflammation panel, they'll do this basic list. Hits the big ones, you know, like wheat and potatoes and things like that. Well, the way this test is done is you have to have a fasting blood sample. And blood is drawn and then put in measured aliquots with the food antigen. We get these from a company that has prepared extracts of these foods, and that's a measured amount mixed with your blood. And then they're allowed to sit 2 hours, because remember, this is delayed sensitivities. We're waiting for things to happen, not necessarily right away, and then they're read under the microscope. And the other handout I gave you actually gives you a picture of what's going on. If you look at the top, or either in your handout or on here, this would be normal blood. You know, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. Okay, if you're having a reaction to the food, as the technician is reading things under the microscope, they'll see some sort of deterioration in your cells. And we actually have had a time-released, or what do you call it, delayed time-lapse photography of somebody's white blood cell with a sensitive food, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon it just exploded. So it was deteriorating the cellular membrane around the white blood cell, and then it releases all these lymphokines and histamines, and so that, cells are being broken down. A borderline reaction is your 1+. A lot more going on with a 2 or a 3+ reaction, and then 4+ is a kind of a total cellular wipeout. And they're very careful when they do this test. They run for each test what we call a positive control and a negative control. What that means is when they make sure that your blood reacts to something, because they have like a general pool of antigens, and they test your reaction to that. Because if you had no reaction at all to that, there'd be something wrong with your immune system where it wasn't reacting at all. And then we have what's called a negative control to make sure you're not reacting to nothing. If your blood is there with no antigen, are you reacting? That would mean there was actually something wrong with the test. So they run those controls every time with each test and look at under the microscope, the 90 different food sensitivities. Okay. Yeah.
What's item number 10 on the list?
Item number 10. Oh, on the small print here. Oh, yeah. Oh, we're getting to that. Yeah. Food. In fact, just like a segue right into my next. Food additives. We put lots of additives in our foods these days when you're getting something other than, your fresh spinach. And of course, your fresh spinach, you're not sure what it's been sprayed with or what pesticides it's been exposed to. But for the last, 100 years, food processing has really gotten geared up. And so we have additives more and more in our foods. And they may be fairly clear on the label, or they may be part of a food component and they don't have to be on the label. For instance, if you have picked up a food that has grape juice in it, and they put sulfites in that grape juice, they do it in white grape juice, they don't have to report that food has sulfites in it because they've put the grape juice in, and that's considered a food component that's already had that's already got the additives, and now you're adding it to another food. It's a loophole is what it is. So you can't always be sure about your food labels. Okay, now here's the additives we test. Here we go. BHA and BHT is short for a very long chemical name. I won't even attempt. But what it is, it's an antioxidant preservative. And they used to put it in all our vegetable oils, and they don't do that anymore. But you need to check your labels because it appears in a lot of things. Cereal boxes. I was just told the other day it's in a lot of prepared meats to try to keep them from going rancid. And it's a very common sensitivity. And then this artificial sweeteners, the aspartame that's been around a while, and even the new kid on the block, the sucralose, people can be sensitive to, and even the old saccharin as well. And then there's sulfur products, sodium bisulfite or sulfur dioxide. These are put in foods to retard browning. So the sulfur dioxide you'll often see in dried fruit, like a dried apricot. They're trying to keep it apricot colored, so it's in there. Otherwise, the apricot's going to start looking brown. If the dried fruit's already brown, like a brown raisin, it may not be in there. It shouldn't be, but I always read my label just in case. And the sulfites, like white grape juice, sometimes there's white wines with sulfites, and things like dried potatoes to keep them potato white. And then, a very common food additive, monosodium glutamate. It's a flavor enhancer. Makes you think the food tastes better. Doesn't have a preservative quality. They put it in a lot of restaurant food, so it's eater beware in the restaurant. And it will be on the label of a lot of foods there towards the end. I find that broth is one of the biggest culprits, bouillon and things like that. Other things, dextrose is a sweetener from corn. Here's your nitrite family. It's put in a lot of meats to keep them pink. So you'll see it in bacon, lunch meats. These are really good things to avoid, even if you're not sensitive to them. Chlorine and fluorine are things that we test, and sure enough, a lot of people are sensitive to those. We get it in our water, cleaning supplies, toothpaste, all over the place. There's the artificial sweeteners and food dyes. We test 4 colors, and some people have found not only they can't eat those food colors, they can't wear them too. So you never know what you might be sensitive to. Now, food-wise, what we've found is people are very commonly sensitive to pineapples, onions, eggs, the grape raisin family, vanilla, corn, tea, hops, that's beer, apples, navy or kidney beans, white potatoes, oats, coffee, rice, tomatoes, tobacco, wheat, soybeans, shrimp, carrots, chocolate, chicken, lettuce, bananas, and yeast. And I went and looked on the government website, and what are our most commonly eaten fruits and vegetables? Well, bananas and apples, watermelon, oranges, cantaloupe, grapes, grapefruit, and strawberries. I see a lot of people sensitive to strawberries too. And our most commonly eaten vegetables in the United States are potatoes and iceberg lettuce. We're really in trouble. Tomatoes, onion, carrots, celery, sweet corn, and broccoli. And people, you know, they see they're sensitive to broccoli, and very often it's brother food, cauliflower, and they go, but they're good for you. Yeah, but you're still sensitive to it, so you got to desensitize yourself. Now, this is the way it's reported in our lab. We use a color code. If you don't have a gray bar next to the food, you haven't had a reaction. The longer your gray bar, you've had a sensitivity, and the longer it is, the higher the sensitivity. And this is just an example of how colorful it can be, and not too atypical how many gray bars one can see. Like I said, we eat a mixture of foods, and it's hard to pick them out just by the elimination test, which is the classic way to find your food sensitivities, is eliminate one food at a time. And very often that elimination diet has had you eating rice as your base food and then adding other foods one at a time. Well, I find a lot of people are sensitive to rice, so that doesn't really help them get started very well. But you can desensitize and make your bowels healthier. And what we encourage people to do is to go through an elimination period. Your 1 pluses, try to be off of those for 2 to 4 weeks. Your 2 pluses, at least 2 months. Your 3 pluses, maybe 3 months and more. And while you're doing that, make sure you're taking good bacteria, those probiotics, to help build up the walls of your small bowel so that there are those tight little surfaces there for absorbing the appropriate nutrients and not letting the toxins and the big proteins through. And then you go and challenge yourself and do a little, special self-education, adding 1 food back at a time every 3 days. Because remember, these are delayed sensitivities. If arthritis is the thing that the foods trigger in you, it may not show up for a couple of days. I have had people have more immediate reactions, either with headaches or guts or sinuses, but it can also be delayed. So give it a 3-day window before you add another food. And then you judge. Some foods are bigger offenders than others. I say if you find something that's a big offender, it's eat or beware, so that you try to avoid it when you can, and you know what to expect when you can't avoid it. Or if it's something that you've kind of desensitized yourself a little bit with, your gut's healthier, you may be able to eat it a couple of times a week, small quantities, and do fine. Now, there is an additive effect. If you got sort of overzealous, was eating one of your 2s every day, like oatmeal or something like that, your morning routine, you may get back into a sensitivity mode. So one of the things that's really helpful, I find, when people start getting off of these foods is they explore eating different foods. Variety is really key. If you keep eating the same thing over and over again, you may develop a sensitivity where if you just have a variety of food so that you're not eating everything or the same thing every day. However, I'll qualify that. I also find people sensitive to foods that they eat every day and sensitive to foods they've never touched. So there's something unique about the body chemistry and reaction to foods. So it's sort of a voyage of exploration. Now, when you're avoiding food sensitivities, you have to remember what, for instance, wheat means. Wheat means wheat gluten, wheat bran, wheat germ. It means bulgur, gram, farina, triticale, semolina, spelt, kamut. Those are all wheats, or names for wheat flour, things like that. And then when you're avoiding corn, you have to, think of the whole kernel corn, cornmeal, corn tortillas, corn starch, high fructose corn syrup, which if you ever read your food labels, you'll find is everywhere. And dextrose is from corn. And then if you have a milk sensitivity, you may have to think about cheeses, sour cream, butter, yogurt. And rice usually includes white rice, brown rice, wild rice, rice bran, which you sometimes see in health food products, and brown rice syrup, which you see some things sweetened with. Soy is going to include the soybeans, the kind of green ones, the edamame that people enjoy. Soybean oil, which is kind of like high fructose corn syrup, is everywhere. And texturized vegetable protein. It's most commonly either from soy or from wheat. And then eggs mean the whole eggs, egg whites included, which are the egg substitutes. So I tell folks, study your ingredient list. Go right past the food label and straight to the ingredient list and examine everything that's on there, because the things like your BHA and your BHT and your nitrites, and those are going to be towards the end of the list, because the ingredient list is in order of the foods and the food components. The biggest quantity are listed first, and like in juices, it's often water. And then comes your concentrated fruit juice, and then towards the bottom you'll get to some of the dyes and all. Okay, and I had something that's not in your handout, but in stores now, you can't get very far without tripping over some Easter candy. So I just thought I'd remind you all the additives in candy, and this is a short list. Okay, from corn you'll see dextrose, maltodextrin, and modified food starch in candy. Citrus, from the citrus and apples, you'll see citric acid, pectin, and malic acid in candies. The fats, you'll see hydrogenated vegetable oils, glycerin, and something called magnesium stearate. And there's a lot of BHA, that antioxidant in candies. Gelatin, which comes from animal products, byproducts. Albumin, which comes from proteins, most notably egg protein. Lecithin is from soy. And then you have an assortment of food dyes. If you have colorful candy, you can be sure it's colored with something. Vanilla's in there. Sometimes they say it's vanilla. Sometimes they just say it's natural flavoring. You don't know, it's vanilla. And the list goes on. So take that in mind, candy in moderation. All right. But the way to approach this is to focus on whole foods, because if you are eating the foods pretty much the way nature processed them, you're getting less additives and processing. And of course, if you choose organic, you're having the opportunity to avoid mysterious pesticides and herbicides. So less processing in packaged foods means less mystery ingredients. And, if you can eat these foods, don't forget about eating seeds and nuts, just the way they came. And then the nut butters where they just ground up the nuts. Think more beans and peas. You can put them in soups and salads. You can just serve them as a side order. And if you have problems with wheat flour, they make bean flour and bean pasta. So there's all sorts of variations, especially for people who can't eat wheat. And don't forget your whole fruits and vegetables. And think about using fresh herbs more, because in a lot of those packaged spice mixes, you'll find a lot of ingredients. They'll have dextrose, and the list kind of goes on and on. But if you're using a fresh herb, it's a plant, came out of the ground. So, and then if you're really finding that there's foods that you enjoy that aren't a common food, but don't feel like you're 100%. You might think about more food testing on things that are a little unusual, like I was using a lot of flaxseed meal because it's healthy for you. And wasn't sure I was feeling all that great after our smoothies. We make these power smoothies with plain yogurt and lots of fruit, and we were throwing in nuts and flaxseed. Well, I tested myself, and guess what? I was sensitive to flax. So don't discount your reactions and your studying of your reactions to foods. You can test yourself. Withdraw that food for a while and retest it. Now, there's a lot of resources here at the center. If you're interested in learning more, there's more lectures on the food sensitivities. And the lecture, I did a lecture also on probiotics, the good bacteria as well as going wheatless. And then there's tons of things on the internet to kind of get you going. And happy eating. Thanks for coming and visiting today. And we have time for questions. We're going to come around with the microphone.
I have a question about goat milk. I did the cytotoxic test, and I think it was a number 2, possibly a 3 for milk. And I understand that was supposed to be cow's milk, but I was wondering about the goat's yogurt. Whether that would automatically, I don't know.
No, it's not automatic. It's a good bet you might be okay with goat's milk, but we have added that to the second list. Okay. And if you just want to do one item, you can do one item. You don't have to do the whole list. You have your choices. Yeah. So goat's milk, before you get too heavy into it, you might test. Yeah.
I have a question actually about pets, because even if it's healthy food like science diet, if like a cat is eating it every single day, are they having problems, do you think?
Animals, they're used to a variety of foods also, because if in their wild state they were out foraging. So if you have an animal that's showing symptoms of like dermatitis, losing hair or getting itchy skin or scaly skin, you might think about the diet. Yeah, it's heavily grain-based these days for animals. Yeah.
Okay. On your nightshade observation right here, it says arthritis is triggered by nightshade products. And is it right to, if you eliminate tomatoes, white potatoes, eggplants, peppers, would that noticeably lessen your stiffness in your joints?
It's worth a try. I don't find everybody finds nightshades as a trigger, but it's so well documented that it's certainly worth a try. And those are things we so commonly eat. Giving up tomatoes can really throw people into a spin because, there goes the chili, the tomato sauce on the spaghetti. But it's worth a try to see how you feel. No, I'd give it a little bit more time. You have that 3-day window, but since there's so many foods there, you might want to give it a little bit longer time because, things like stiffness in your arthritis is an inflammatory reaction that didn't, just start yesterday. It takes a while for that to cool down. So, you might consider giving it up for a couple of months.
Would it also eliminate aching or just the stiffness?
Well, for some people, they've thought it helped with achiness too. Yeah. You're welcome.
Your BHT and BHA, you have under there sodium. Does that mean salt? Is BHT, BHA?
Let's see. Let me go back.
You listed NutraSweet and then sodium.
Was it monosodium?
It was just plain sodium.
Oh, let's see here. It's probably goes on to the next
it's
line.
Under common reactive additives.
Okay.
Right there.
And so it says sodium.
Oh yeah,
there.
it's the sodium bisulfite. That's the actual compound. The way the bisulfite comes bonded to a sodium. So you'll see. When you're looking for sulfur on food labels, you'll see sulfur dioxide. That's one. Sometimes you'll see something that says bisulfites or metasulfites, and then sometimes it'll say sodium bisulfite.
But it's not referring to regular, just salt.
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Then on your MSG, you list Splenda, and if you have pretty good allergy against sugar cane and maple syrup, and you want to use you want something that's not sugar, what are you going to use there? What would you recommend?
Well, I tell folks when they're looking for sugar substitutes to think about some of the products that are more natural, which would be the stevia, which is just, stevia is a plant. We can grow it here in Kansas. They grind up the leaf, and it's very sweet.
But it's made from corn, though, and I'm allergic to corn.
No, stevia, not Splenda.
Oh,
It's called
stevia tastes terrible.
Well, you
But
have to...
I've tried it.
Yeah.
It's really
Okay.
bad. And then I tried Xanthia or something
No,
like that.
xylitol.
Xylitol, and it's made from corn, and I'm allergic to corn.
Yeah, some of those are so extracted that you might be okay. Now, part of that is it's helpful to try to modify that sweet tooth so that you don't feel too necessary to put sweets, like in your coffee or tea.
Okay.
You could also try the agave syrup that they have now. I mean, we probably need to start testing people for agave if it gets really popular. But that's a possibility.
Are you talking
Yeah,
about?
it's a cactus.
Uh-huh, okay.
But stevia you have to use very cautiously. I literally get out a wooden toothpick to measure my stevia with. That's how sweet it is. You start with the flat edge toothpick. You start out with just a little bit on that toothpick, and then go from there. It goes bitter fast.
Yeah, it's very bitter.
That's
the
too
other
much.
question is, what is a probiotic? It says
Probiotic are your good bowel bacteria, your acidophilus, your bifidobacterium, all those good bacteria.
Well, it says take one, so what do you mean take
You go to the health food store and you ask for a refrigerated probiotic, or you eat yogurt.
Oh, I eat a lot of yogurt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All righty.
Some excellent questions. Keep in mind, we do record all these sessions. Do we have another question? We record all these sessions, and if you'd like a copy, please fill out the form, and we'll take care of that for you.
On your standard list 1, you have the beef and the chicken, and on the standard list 2, you have the beef liver and the chicken liver. So are you saying that you could have a sensitivity to beef and chicken, but possibly not to beef, to the liver of the beef and the chicken?
Possibly, because, the standard beef or chicken is the muscle, and then the liver, whole different organism, or a whole different organ. So, yeah, possible. Yeah, in fact, you can't... One reason we do so many foods on the testing is because it prevents you from having to throw out a whole class of foods just because, say, you were sensitive to tomatoes, and so you wanted to avoid all the nightshades. But we test for a lot of nightshades so that you have that option. Maybe you're not sensitive to potatoes, for instance, or so that gives you a little bit more chance to have variety in your diet, because you can, lump foods by family, and pretty soon you've thrown out all the families. Yeah, we got one more.
Just one question on your thoughts on the probiotics, and there seems to be a new system of preserving them that doesn't require refrigeration. What are your thoughts on that? Is some kind of encapsulated gelatin, something around it?
Well, from the research I did when I gave that talk on probiotics, they're very susceptible to temperature. Let's put it that way. So having them in a gel cap would just preserve them from air. It's not going to preserve them from temperature. And then the other thing is, a bacteria by definition cannot be considered a probiotic unless it can get through the stomach acid, and the bile acid. So it doesn't really have to be encapsulated for, to get the shortcut through the bowels. Because after all, we eat yogurt and we get bacteria from that, and that's going straight to the stomach. So, yeah. So I'm not so sure about the new technology.
Thank you. What about the omega-3s helping us fight some of these allergy problems?
Yeah, and of course that's, if you want to talk about inflammation, all those things that help you reduce inflammation in addition to leaving off your sensitive foods would include things like the omega-3 fatty acids. And then don't forget vitamin C is a really good antihistamine. So a lot of people use that when they're encountering histamine-containing foods or trigger foods. They just up their vitamin C.
Okay.
How soon should one be tested again, a cytotoxic test?
Okay. Not too soon. I would even give it a year. Because, and what I see is like the 1+ can come and go. 2 and 3s rarely do. Sometimes 2s do, but your 3s are kind of with you for life, it seems like. They may be less sensitive.
The preceding program was presented by the Center for the Improvement of Human Functioning International in the Bright Spot for Health Lunch and Lecture Series. To inquire about additional health-related information available on DVD, audio CD, VHS, or audio cassette, simply call 316-682-3100 or drop by 3100 North Hillside in Wichita, Kansas. To discover more about the Center and what we have to offer, be sure and visit us on the web at www.brightspot.org.